Yes, they did, but they also put really rude stuff on them as well. And I'm going to invite you to play a little game in a moment called Guess the Rude Word. But before I get to those particular bullets, let's talk about the whistling ones. The whistling ones, well, they whistled, and they did that because apparently the small hole they had drilled in them made a whizzing sound as they flew through the air. And you might wonder why that was exactly, because surely you'd want these to cause a physical effect on the enemy rather than just make a sound. Well, it's argued that these are actually there to give a sort of psychological effect or render a psychological effect upon the enemies. The idea was that these would be loosened in large quantities, because apparently you could put 3 or 4 of these, or it has been argued you could put 3 or 4 of these bullets in one sling at a time. So multiply that by the number of slingers. You've got loosening, you've got lots of these in the air, they're making this weird sound. And the idea was you degrade the sort of mental status of the enemy. They'd be hearing these weird sounds, they couldn't necessarily see them, what's happening, or rather what's going to happen next. And this feeds to a wider point that I've often mentioned in my videos when talking about ancient warfare, that there was a lot of psychology in play, and that was to G your own troops up, but also to degrade the mental status of your enemy, because you ultimately want them to rout, you want them to break, you want them to go away. And if you can get them to do that quickly, all the better. Now, bullets could also have things carved onto them, so inscriptions and sometimes even just images. And this one is a good example. So this isn't rude by any standards. This is Greek, apparently, so it dates to the Hellenistic period. And it just has the Greek word for catch on it, which I suppose is being a bit tongue-in-cheek. But if we want to go into the really rude stuff, there's some great examples from the siege of Perusia, which occurred in 4140 BC or thereabouts. And this was conducted by Octavian, and it was against Lucius Antonius, who was Mark Antony's brother, and Fulvia, who was Mark Antony's wife. And there are a number of these that have been found with lots of things written on them, and I'm going to take 2 examples, and you can guess the word. And to be balanced, as I always want to be, I've selected one from either side. The first bullet, presumably used by those under siege from Octavian, contained the inscription Fellas Octavi. Apologies for my pronunciation or my Latin there. And this translates as something along the lines of, "You suck, Octavian." You can probably guess the word, though if you can't, here's a clue. Think of a bird. If you thought that was personal, I would argue the second one is even more so, because it literally targeted Fulvia, the wife of Mark Antony. And apparently the Latin read Petto Landicam Fulviae. Now, that translates, or has been translated, to read something on the lines of, "I am aimed at Fulvia's." And in case you're wondering what, think of a very specific area on the female anatomy, one which men are said to not be able to find very easily.